Autism was first discovered in 1910. Let's learn a little bit more. Now, we find that there is a relationship on vaccination, but it's not causative. There is a direct causative relationship with certain chemicals, farm chemicals, pesticides. If we look at the history of immunization, we'll see that it dates way back in history. And autism was not even discovered. But when synthetic chemicals were first released into farms in the same location, that is when 1 year later autism was discovered. Now, these same type of chemicals now today are in mother's milk. They're everywhere. And if we really look into this situation, we're going to see that when these synthetic chemicals were first used in an area between Switzerland and France, that then is when autism was discovered. A doctor and a group of doctors found out that there were children that had a type of schizophrenia they'd never seen before. It was just never seen before. They didn't know what to think of it. And as they looked at these children, they found that these children were internalized or into themselves, so they called it autism. And this autism was then discovered 1 year after these chemicals were put into those farms. A direct correlation. Now, if we look around the world today, we're going to see that autism is spreading just like these chemicals are spreading. That there's a direct problem here. That the mother, when carrying the child, exposed to these chemicals, it sets up the autism problem. And we see a direct correlation, a perfect correlation, that tells us that these type of pesticides, herbicides, these synthetic chemicals are directly the cause. And every child who has been exposed to these chemicals is at risk. And every autism child is definitely has been exposed to those chemicals. If we look at it and we see how autism is expanding throughout the world, we're going to see a direct correlation. We don't see autism developing much in countries that do not use these chemicals. The more the countries use these chemicals, the more autism we see, as that there truly is a direct correlation between this. And even the World Health Organization has recognized that these chemicals cause cancer and autism. And these chemicals get into the womb, they get into the environment, into the food chain, and they create this damage. And this is where autism happens, in development in the womb. And it's even in the breast milk. And we have to do something, because if it doesn't change, half of all of the children in the United States will be autistic by 2025. And what about antibiotics in autism? What's the research tell us there? Well, surprisingly enough, we're going to see that antibiotics are involved with autism as well.
A 2012 paper by Dr. Derek McFabe describes what happens when rats are injected with something called propionic acid, or PPA. The PPA injection provoked peculiar changes in the rats' brains like neuroinflammation, increased oxidative stress, and glutathione depletion. The rats also displayed abnormal movements, repetitive interests, cognitive deficits, and impaired social interactions. Basically, the results of this injection were very similar to autism spectrum disorders. And PPA is a fermentation product of bacteria, namely Desulfovibrio, Bacteroidetes, and Clostridia. It was found that patients with autism have many more species of the Clostridium bacteria and have high levels of PPA in their feces. It's estimated that in 1/3 of patients, autism doesn't show up until around age 18 to 24 months. Several reports from parents say that their children were developing normally until they received antibiotics for upper respiratory or ear infections. According to Dr. Sidney Feingold, antibiotics wipe out or suppress several organisms in the gut, but Clostridia is one of the ones that persists. A CBC program titled The Autism Enigma features Ellen Bolte, who explains how her son Andrew's behavior changed drastically after 6 courses of antibiotics over a 2 to 3.5 month period for an ear infection. After this, he was diagnosed with severe autism. Digging into the research, Ellen came across information about the Clostridia bacteria, so she started searching for a doctor who would be willing to try an antibiotic called vancomycin on Andrew. Vancomycin is specifically designed to target the Clostridia bacteria. After she finally found a doctor who agreed to test her theory, they tried the antibiotic, and it had impressive effects.
The results were astounding. Within a matter of just a few weeks, he became calm. He was aware of his environment. He's putting puzzles together.
The antibiotic brought out improvements in Andrew that were transient but drastic. This case led to a pilot study with Dr. Feingold and a Dr. R. Sandler, who found that out of 10 autistic children treated with vancomycin, 8 of them had again transient but significant improvements. Now, jumping to conclusions about the cause of autism has not been helpful in the past, but this idea that autism could be the result of a disturbed gut is gathering more and more data. A disturbed gut ecosystem would also explain the very common gastrointestinal issues autistic children suffer. Some estimates say that as high as 70% of children with autism spectrum disorders also have gastrointestinal issues. Autism is just one of the disorders that can be linked to a disruption in gut health, and research on the gut microbiome is growing quickly. About 3,600 articles on this topic were published between 2010 and 2015. At this point, saying the gut microbiome is important to health is an understatement. Dr. Martin Blosser says that losing your entire microbiome outright would be nearly as bad as losing your kidneys or liver. Unlike the kidneys or liver, however, you can change the makeup of your microbiome with what you put in your mouth. I guess Hippocrates knew what he was talking about when he said all disease begins in the gut, and let food be thy medicine.
So it looks like antibiotics are involved with autism. And we all know that we should have stopped using the antibiotics. It was the wrong choice. And we're going to see that there's a direct link to the chemical industry and autism. We have to recognize this. And we also have to recognize that this is just the canary in the coal mine. As the gas builds up and it gets dangerous in the mine, the canary dies. Well, this is where our own children are the canary now. This is just the tip of the iceberg as these synthetic chemicals do more and more damage, as they create loss of jobs, loss of families, loss of relationships. Diseases are just the tip of the iceberg, diseases and death. There's so many other things that they cause. And now we know that the Nobel Prize in Medicine was awarded to a team of researchers who found natural ways to deal with things like malaria and roundworms. And we have developed natural ways to help with autism and etc. You can dig these through our books and help to understand more. Time's running out in the future. Synthetic should be spelled S-I-N, synthetic. We need to do something about this.